Last Night in Soho is the most recent movie being released, directed by Edgar Wright. It stars Thomasin McKenzie and Anya Taylor-Joy. I'm very excited for an Edgar Wright movie to be the first singular review that I put out on YouTube, because he's one of my favorite filmmakers. Side note, I know that this is the same thing that a lot of people on YouTube do. I've watched people doing this for a long time, and so I've decided on what I want to do that's a little bit different. Hopefully I'll have something different to say. If not, I'm sure you'll let me know. But this is another branch of our channel, and I'm very excited to be starting to do this here. If you go look at an app called Rizzle, you can see me having struggled through 100 episodes of this over there. I'd like to believe it went well, but we'll see. So Last Night in Soho, I haven't watched it yet. And what I want to do for these reviews is watch the movie, and then my rating is not going to be of the movie, but of whether or not you can trust my opinion in terms of reviews at large, the critical reaction across the board, like we talk about a lot on Critics Critique. But on the flip side of that, sometimes I am going to comment on the narrative that's being put out by media on a movie before I see the movie, and then talk about how that may inform my experience when I see the movie, because there are some things with Last Night in Soho that I just can't avoid. Not that anybody's dropped any spoilers or anything. I mean, it just seems largely like people are watching this movie pass by. And for someone who has so much control and so much intent and so much vision behind his projects as Edgar Wright, that's really sticking out to me, especially when he's branching out and most people are acknowledging he's doing something ambitious. And I have my ticket and I'll be going to see it tomorrow. And so part of this video that you're going to watch, I'll have seen the movie. Right now, across Rotten Tomatoes, Metacritic, on random review sites, this is the narrative that I'm going into the movie with. Last Night in Soho is something that gradually picks up pacing, something that gradually builds tension and chills, and there's some horrific things happening in this movie. The idea is that this movie picks up and builds and builds and builds pace and tension and peaks before the end of the movie and begins to slow down and miss some of its point. Either people are saying it runs out of steam, but it's generally fun, or the movie is trying to stretch at horrific concepts and still trying to be a mainstream movie and not necessarily balancing these things very well. I really think I'm going to like The Last Night in Soho. I think I'm going to rate it positively, but I'm very curious what I'm going to end up feeling regarding all these people who are talking about the movie getting dull the more it becomes sort of a ghost story or horror type thing. If the suggestion is that Edgar Wright doesn't know how to handle these elements or what, but I noticed that people aren't spending a lot of time focusing on the characters in the story, and this is a misstep that happens with a lot of Edgar Wright's movies that are so character driven. Take The World's End. Bing! The World's End is about an alien invasion. But The World's End is also about a person's drive to relive something so that he feels like his life has the meaning he wants it to have. I don't see anybody talking about anything like this. It's like the movie just hasn't resonated on any level with most of the people that I've watched or listened to. So I'm wondering what I'm going to walk away thinking about Last Night in Soho that maybe people aren't talking about.
And you are?
Sandy.
Okay, gonna go in and watch. Alright, my appearance is different. I'm filming this on Halloween night, and I'm glad I took a couple of days to think about this. Because as, in summary, reviewers have said, this is a movie with strong direction and strong performances that seems like it's leading a certain way in terms of what meaning the story has. And then sort of drops that and it ramps up the supernatural elements of what's going on. Thomasin McKenzie is not what I expected based on what people say. She is a character who lost her mother, and she is a character who is only tied to her mother through the same sort of fantasy and romanticized look she has at 60s London. And this makes her different than just an avatar for the audience of anyone who just thinks, I wish I lived in a different time period. It's like that relationship is singular to her, and she's very driven by it. I will say it's a little unclear what her illness is or what the reason is that she is able to see things that other people can't. I think really there's a problem with the way that this has to be promoted and reviewed critically, because you can't spoil things. And so, brief, vague spoilers here. The end of the movie turns into an Edgar Allan Poe, Sweeney Todd, tidal wave whirlpool. And it's completely different tonally than what you expect from this building threat and thread of who the actual threat is. And this deviation just sort of suggests to you a story that's happened that you didn't see. But right then and there is where I can no longer be as critical as I think people are being of this movie and people who are passing over it. This is still a movie that meets commercial entertainment and art house in the middle. There are not a lot of movies with this premise. There is originality here, and the things that are not original are basically driven into specific moments that are supposed to invoke horror. Whether you're scared of it or not is your business. But this girl is nostalgic, and that is a threat to her. And in the same way, when she is experiencing those horrors, they are references to things for which Edgar Wright is likely nostalgic for. People have mentioned like Suspiria, Peeping Tom, different things. The farther I get into thinking about how this movie could have been different, the more I realize I'm just coming up with my own interpretations that are inspired by this movie. I'm definitely going to want to rewatch this because Anya Taylor-Joy's character romanticized fame. Thomasin McKenzie's character romanticizes the 60s, nostalgia, not fame in her own right, not fame now. She doesn't want to become necessarily the most famous fashion designer in the world. Last Night in Soho is about how fictionalized ideals are bait used historically to bring women to horrors. The question that is not necessarily played with as much as it is kind of answered rapidly through a bunch of back and forth in the last 5 minutes of the movie is, so those institutions do deserve to have crumbled, but that doesn't mean that that people can't in their own right create their own success. She doesn't abandon her vision for the 60s, Eloise. She embraces it and ultimately finds a life somewhere in the middle, without condemning the people who have fallen victim to the same machine that has been building since the 60s. And I think that, in and of itself, is the reason why the story has merit. And I really hope that this does offer some sort of encouragement, if not inspiration, for people to continue to write stories and realize that they can be considered commercial and they can be successes, although unfortunately it just doesn't look like, based on the critical narrative, that this is going to be a success. Although, fortunately, the production company has come out and said that they've gotten what they wanted out of it. So, happy to see that, happy to say that. I I was disappointed, if anything, by one thing. I don't like that someone, like, you know, has to show, oh, this person was stabbed, and they're walking around stabbed, and, like, then have the rug pulled out from under you, and it just didn't happen. I don't know, it just feels like a odd rug pull. But other than that, the movie is gorgeous and performed so well with a script that feels lived in and still almost like pristine and articulate in that way that Edgar Wright keeps things under control. And it's definitely worth a watch. And I think anyone out there who is not thrown off by any of the sort of warnings you could get in the ratings for the movie, you should absolutely spend money to watch the movie and support it.